There are places in this world where reality bends, where the past refuses to stay buried, where whispers crawl from the dark, waiting to be heard. This is one of those places, and you are not alone. Chapter 1: The First Sight. Eli always hated the old park at the edge of town. It had been abandoned for decades, overrun by nature, but there was something else, something wrong about it. The air always felt colder there, the trees unnaturally twisted, as if recoiling from something unseen. He wouldn't have gone near it at all if his car hadn't broken down that evening. The walk back home cut through the park, and with the sun sinking behind the hills, the thought of trudging through it made his skin crawl. But the alternative, taking the long road around, meant hours in the dark. He had no choice. As Eli stepped into the park, the first thing he noticed was the silence. No wind, no birds, not even the faint hum of distant traffic. It was as if the world had stopped. His footsteps crunched on the gravel path, each sound echoing unnaturally loud. Halfway through, he saw it. A carving on a rotting wooden bench. At first glance, it looked like a smile, crudely etched, the lines jagged and uneven. But as Eli stepped closer, he realized it wasn't just a smile. Two hollow ovals, carved above the curve, glared back at him. Eyes. Creepy, he muttered under his breath, trying to ignore the chill running down his spine. But as he turned to leave, something else caught his eye. Another carving, this time on the trunk of a gnarled tree just a few feet away. It was the same face, the same jagged smile, the same empty staring eyes. Eli's breath quickened. He scanned the area, his heart pounding. The carvings weren't random. They formed a trail, leading deeper into the park. Against his better judgment, he followed them. The further he went, the more frequent they became. On trees, on broken swing sets, on crumbling concrete walls. Always the same smile, the same burning eyes. Then he saw it. Not a carving this time, a figure. It stood motionless at the edge of a clearing, its silhouette barely visible against the encroaching darkness. Two glowing orange eyes burned through the shadows, and its grin stretched impossibly wide, jagged and flickering like flames. Eli froze. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The figure didn't move, but its presence pressed down on him like a weight. The air grew colder, heavier, and Eli's legs felt rooted to the ground. A sound broke the silence. A faint, rasping laugh, low and guttural. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding him. The figure tilted its head, the smile growing wider, as if it was waiting for something. Eli stumbled back, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The figure didn't follow, didn't move, but its eyes stayed fixed on him, burning into his soul. Without another thought, Eli turned and ran, the laughter chasing him into the night. Chapter 2: The Haunting. Eli didn't stop running until he reached the edge of town. The familiar glow of streetlights greeted him, but even under their safety, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. His chest heaved as he doubled over, struggling to catch his breath. His mind raced, replaying the glowing eyes and that horrible, flickering grin. By the time he stumbled into his apartment, the night felt heavier, the silence unbearable. He locked the door, bolted it, and slid the chain into place. Every shadow in the room seemed darker, every creak of the building sharper. Sleep didn't come easily. Even with every light on, Eli lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind refusing to let him forget what he'd seen. When exhaustion finally took him, it didn't bring relief, only nightmares. In his dreams, he stood in the park again, the trail of carvings leading him deeper and deeper into the void. The figure stood waiting, its grin stretching across the sky, its laughter reverberating through the earth. He woke with a start, drenched in sweat. the phantom sound of laughter still ringing in his ears. The following day, Eli tried to push the memory away. Maybe it was stress. Maybe he'd imagined the whole thing. He threw himself into his work, trying to lose himself in the monotony of numbers and spreadsheets. But the moment his eyes wandered, there it was again. The grin. It appeared faintly on the edges of his papers, sketched into the shadows of his peripheral vision. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but then the lines became clearer, more deliberate. When his computer screen glitched and distorted, revealing two glowing eyes and that infernal grin for a split second, he nearly screamed. Eli left work early. His co-workers' concerned stares didn't matter. The figure had followed him. It was everywhere now. The carvings began to appear on his commute home, at the bus stop, on the corner of his street, even on the wall outside his apartment building. That night, he found one carved into the headboard of his bed. The grin was no longer confined to the shadows or his dreams. It became a presence, a weight in the room. When Eli passed a mirror, the figure stared back at him, its eyes glowing, its smile never wavering. The whispers began soon after. Low, guttural sounds that crawled into his ears as he lay in bed, too terrified to move. They didn't form words, but their meaning was clear, an invitation. The figure wanted him to return to the park. Eli resisted. He stayed inside, locked every door, and covered every window. But it didn't matter. The figure didn't need an invitation to get in. One night, the laughter returned. It started softly, like an echo in the distance. Then it grew louder, closer, until it seemed to come from right behind him. Eli spun around, but the room was empty. "Leave me alone!" he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. The laughter stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, in the dim glow of his bedside lamp, Eli saw it. The figure stood at the foot of his bed, its eyes burning like embers, its grin wider than ever. It didn't move, but its presence filled the room, suffocating him. Eli scrambled backward, pressing himself against the headboard. "What do you want?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The figure tilted its head, the glow in its eyes intensifying. The whispers returned, louder this time, a cacophony that made Eli's head throb. Through the noise, one phrase emerged, clear and unmistakable. "Come back." Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. Eli sat frozen, his body trembling, his mind racing. He couldn't go back to the park, but he knew the figure wouldn't stop until he did. Chapter 3. The Revelation. Eli didn't go back to the park the next day, or the day after. For nearly a week, he stayed locked in his apartment, avoiding the windows, avoiding the mirrors, and doing everything he could to block out the whispers that had become a constant hum in his ears. But the figure didn't need to wait for him to leave. It appeared more frequently now, in the corners of his room, at the end of the hall, or reflected faintly in the black screen of his TV. The grin never wavered, the eyes never dimmed, and the laughter, guttural and low, seemed to come from inside his own mind. Eli couldn't take it anymore. Sleep was a distant memory. Food tasted like ash in his mouth. The figure didn't just haunt him, it consumed him. And the whispers, they grew louder with every passing day. "Come back," they urged, over and over. By the 7th night, Eli snapped. "Fine," he shouted into the empty room. "You want me to come back? I'll come back." The laughter stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Eli didn't remember walking to the park. One moment, he was grabbing his jacket and keys. The next, he stood at the rusted gates, the familiar chill seeping into his bones. The carvings greeted him immediately. On the gates, the benches, the trees, all staring at him with the same jagged grin. The figure's presence was palpable, suffocating, but it didn't reveal itself. Not yet. Eli walked deeper into the park, his legs moving on their own. The carvings grew denser, more intricate. Some stretched across entire trees, their grins splitting the bark in unnatural ways. Others seemed to shift as he passed, as if watching him. The whispers returned, louder than ever, guiding him. "Keep going, almost there." Eli's body obeyed, though his mind screamed for him to stop. Finally, he reached the clearing. The figure was waiting. It stood in the center, its body impossibly still, its burning eyes fixed on him. But it wasn't alone. Surrounding it were others, figures just like it, grinning and glowing, their jagged smiles flickering like flames in the dark. Eli's breath caught in his throat. The clearing pulsed with an unnatural energy, the air vibrating with an otherworldly hum. The whispers had become a roar now, a deafening cacophony that drowned out his thoughts. The main figure tilted its head, its grin widening. Slowly, it raised a hand and pointed at the ground in front of him. Eli looked down. A carving. No, not a carving. A symbol, etched into the dirt. It glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the whispers. "You brought me here," Eli said, his voice trembling. "What do you want?" The whispers stopped. The silence was absolute. Then the figure spoke. Its voice was like the grinding of stone, like the cracking of ice on a frozen lake. It echoed through the clearing, rattling Eli's bones. "To finish what you started." Eli stumbled back. What? What are you talking about? I didn't start anything." The figure didn't move, but its presence seemed to grow larger, more oppressive. "You called us. You brought us through. And now you will join us." Eli shook his head violently. "No, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't..." The memory hit him like a freight train. Years ago, on a dare, he'd come to the park with his friends. They'd found a strange book in the ruins of an old gazebo, its pages filled with symbols and rituals. It was supposed to be a joke, a stupid prank to scare each other. He'd been the one to read the words aloud, laughing as he did. He hadn't thought about it since. The realization brought him to his knees. The figure stepped closer, its grin now impossibly wide, its eyes burning brighter. "You opened the door," it said. "Now you will keep it open." The ground beneath Eli began to crack, the glowing symbol expanding, consuming the clearing in fiery light. The other figures moved now, circling him, their laughter growing louder and louder. Eli screamed, but it was swallowed by the noise. The last thing he saw was the figure's burning eyes as the light consumed him. The park remained quiet after that night. The carvings faded. The whispers stopped. The townsfolk said nothing about the strange light they'd seen or the tremors they'd felt. But on certain nights, if you walked through the park, you might feel it. A faint chill, a distant laugh, and a flicker of glowing eyes watching from the shadows. And if you stayed too long, you might notice a new carving, a face with a jagged grin, staring out from the trees, waiting for someone new to follow the trail.